Ladies and gentlemen of the congregation, welcome back to another week of the Screen Sermon Podcast, and this one is going to be special because it's our first ever VvV, version versus version, concept that was brought up a few weeks back. We chatted about it, came up with this concept about how can we watch two different versions of essentially the same film and compare them, kind of give our thoughts or like a score almost on it and maybe make a recommendation between the two. So we're going to give that a shot today. So once again, I'm your host, B, and this week I'm here once again with Josh. I believe this is now week 4 straight for you, sir, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you getting sick of me yet?
Nope. Not at all. But I am happy to also have Cody back on the show. Cody, welcome back, sir. It's been a while since we've chatted.
Hey B, hey Josh, great to be back. I can say as a listener, have also not gotten sick of it, so.
Quick caveat before we get started. I am on day 3 of my Invisalign journey, so people out there, if for some reason you think that I'm sounding like the gopher from Winnie the Pooh, that's what's going on. I'm still getting used to making S noises with a bunch of plastic in my mouth. So with that in mind, we're talking about The Fly this week. So we're going to be comparing the 1958 original, which was essentially created from a short story written by George Langeland. I'm sure I'm butchering that name. He's a French-British writer. This story first appeared in the June 1957 issue of Playboy, so... wazow. And,
wow.
Yeah. And it's as we'll get into, it is its own creature compared to, and no pun intended, compared to the film that would come later in 1986, which would be David Cronenberg's The Fly. Very, very different. The skeleton of it is the same, but pretty much everything else about it is different. So yeah, just wanted to throw a couple of things out there about it before we got into it. But you guys, how was this for you in terms of, is this the first time you've interacted with either of these films? Had you watched them recently? First time in a while? First time ever? Things like that?
This was a first time for both for me.
Okay.
Cronenberg's Fly has been on my to-watch list probably since I was in high school. And
wow.
I really don't have a good excuse for why I didn't watch it, except for some kind of attentional disorder of mine where even if I plan to watch a particular movie that weekend, I probably think of like 4 or 5 in the interim, then end up watching one that's not even on the list when the weekend actually comes. It's a gift and a curse. And I knew that it was a remake, much like Carpenter's The Thing, and I think the only reason I put off watching the earlier one was because I wanted to check out the Cronenberg one first, and then kind of backtrack and check out what I thought was like an artifact that was the original, which I found I was wrong about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Josh, what about you?
I've seen both of these before, which is why I suggested it as one of the VvV episodes we should do. I love both movies a lot, and Cronenberg's The Fly is probably in my top 20 films of all time. It's a big...
And with you being an effects guy, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, body horror is my favorite genre, and Cronenberg is among my favorite directors. So everything kind of nestled in little crevices like an English muffin there for me.
It's a delicious analogy. So I guess let's dive right in. So here, the concept, folks, is essentially we're going to take these 4 criteria that we very crudely decided is a way to break down a film. So we're going to talk about the writing. So that's all of the writing. So that would be your story, your dialogue, settings, all of that kind of stuff is all decided in the writing process. We're going to talk about performances, the individual actors and the jobs that they did portraying the characters on the screen. We're going to talk about technical aspects. This one is a pretty wide category because that's where we can talk about cinematography, sound design, music, editing. It kind of is a catch-all. And then the effects department, where we talk about makeup, puppeting, CGI, and all of its various uses and things like that. We also made, or if we can, we're going to make a list of intangibles, which would be things that we don't necessarily think fall within one of those 4 criteria. We will probably be able to prove one another wrong as we go through this process, and we'll be able to slot them into the places that they should be. But when I took my notes, there were certain things that I wasn't thinking very clearly about where to put it. So we'll chat about some of those too. Ultimately, the goal is to give a check mark basically in the box for one movie or the other for each of the 4 categories, and at the end decide a quote-unquote winner for each of us. It's not going to be a communal thing where we have to decide all as one which one's better. So let's talk about the writing, and we'll go from there. So I just wanted to throw out a couple of things about the 1958 film. Well, I guess not a couple of things. It was rated PG for violence, and so I think that's really, and I know this is a time before things like PG-13 existed, but man, specifically from the opening scene, as we'll get to, just imagining a kid getting into this picture with parental guidance, and then that opening murder that they come upon would be a hell of a sight for a small child to see.
That was like something out of the French Revolution.
Yeah, it was gnarly. And then, so what do we know about the 1958 Fly? So we know it seems to take place in France. I mean, all the characters have either French accents or very French-sounding names.
Yeah. The original story was set in France, but they moved it to Canada. I believe Quebec in the film. That's why they have French names, which was confusing me a little bit too.
Okay, so they're supposed to be French Canadian.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, I didn't get that at all. And so, kind of our principal characters here. You've got the Delambre brothers, which is Francois and Andre. You've got Helene, who is Andre's wife. You've got Philippe, who is their son. And I forget the inspector's name. Karras?
That sounds right.
Okay, and Inspector Karras. I feel like those are kind of your principal. These are the ones that you see the most. I mean, Emma, the housekeeper, is in there too, but she's not like incredibly important. So what were some of your some of the notes that you took, or some of the things that you noticed about the writing, how the story was presented, the dialogue, and things like that? What how did that land for you?
You know what I found? I was a little surprised at the structure that they gave it. I had always just kind of accepted, based on very little information, that this was just kind of a straight-ahead B movie. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised.
I was thinking it, but I wasn't going to do it.
I knew that was coming. I've been making that joke in my head all week, believe me. But yeah, I was kind of surprised that they would open it the way they did, as you mentioned, with this grisly murder scene, and then to kind of lead us through, Vincent Price and Herbert Marshall, who does play the Inspector Karras that you mentioned, having them kind of look towards, was this a murder, a suicide, and then also why it was perpetrated. I thought that was a pretty interesting take. This could have just been a very, back to front, scientist gets in deeper than he meant to, and then we see the tragic results of it, Yeah. So, I mean, I gave it more points than I expected to in terms of that structure. That being said, I thought it got a little bit dry in the late parts of the investigative parts, and a little bit towards the early parts of the flashback. Although I thought that the actors held it together. I thought the two main players of the family of that marriage. I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but
no, it's fine.
That part to me, it was not terrible or not bad even, but once it got into the actual experiment and transformation, I thought that part was amazing. And again, this falls under writing to me, because the choices of having this guy only being able to communicate through a typewriter and then later a chalkboard, and then seeing his grammar, but then also his handwriting gradually get more erratic as his mind is kind of eroding. through this transformation, that really hit me. I don't know what it is, and we'll get to this too in the 86 Fly as well, but there's something about typographic, what I called in my notes, typographical omens. Like if you think to The Shining, you know, like those sorts of things really get me. And one points taken away piece of it, though, I thought the denouement, the final scenes were a little bit too apple pie for me. You know,
okay. That's a good way to put it,
yeah, considering everything we saw, like, I love Vincent Price to death. We'll get into that in the performance section, but the whole, like, the kind of solace that he tries to give the kid, I was like, did you see the same shit I did? Like,
right.
Like, this is some of the most tragic shit I've ever seen, you know?
Right, like, we didn't win here. Let's be very clear.
Everything went wrong.
What about you, Josh? What about writing for you?
Cody mentioned one of my favorite things about it is you can see, and this is I'm gonna bring this up in the next category too, but you can see the deterioration from him, writing stuff more erratically, and also I actually like the way that the film is written, the setup wise, because it's not just a sci-fi horror. It's a product of the atomic age of horror and sci-fi, so there's a lot of bullet points that you got to jump between, and this one does that, but it also sets it up in the way of a murder mystery, opening with the aftermath of what happened in the film and questioning our lead actress's sanity, and then going, okay, no, this is how it happened, and then including after the opening scene. So the acts are a little bit shuffled, but I find that makes it way more interesting. Sort of like in photography, where you want something not quite in the center, but a little bit off to the side because it makes a more interesting shot. This is like the film equivalent of that.
So I'll jump in, and then we can go back to you all as well and keep going on the writing. I also liked the structure. So they took what I assumed was going to be a creature feature sci-fi movie about science experiment gone wrong, and they buttressed it with a crime serial almost. Not quite like a hard-boiled like film noir thing, but there's definitely a murder mystery here, where we've got this. And props to the film for subverting my expectations from the jump, because I'm thinking 1958, it's going to be soft, it's not going to bring, the gruesome and stuff like that. The two scenes at the beginning and the end of this film would have scared the bejesus out of me had I been a child when I saw them. Seeing a pneumatic press completely smushed down with the limp body of a man who was obviously crushed by it, and there's just blood all over it, not something I expected to see from a 1958 film. And then at the end, again, we're going to jump all over the place, but seeing a man who has been partially transformed into a fly from his perspective, I mean, as cheesy as like the web looked and stuff like that when you saw it from the far out view, when they showed that close-up view of him in this ghostly white kind of makeup, and he looks very unnatural, he looks really strange, and seeing that spider coming upon him and just realizing that he's doomed, and there's nothing anybody's going to do about it, including Inspector Care. I mean, they were sitting there watching him get preyed upon by the spider, and then only after the spider basically covers Andre's body as the fly, the help me part, only then does Karras hit the fucking spider with a rock. Like, why didn't he do that earlier? You might have been able to save him. But I mean, save him from what? He's just going to live the rest of his existence as a fly person hybrid thing. But I love that structure of like, it's held up on the beginning and the end by its, this crime drama kind of thing of figuring out, did Helene kill him? Is she a murderer? That kind of thing.
When you say childhood, man, that last scene scared me as an adult, man. I'm an arachnophobe, so that thing, I couldn't even look at the screen for a while.
I don't know what I'm not 100. We'll probably talk about it in effects maybe, but I'm not 100% sure how they did it. Like, I don't know if that was a puppet. I don't know if it was. I don't know what it was.
Hero seems to know.
You mentioned like what would happen if you watched this as a child and the effects it would have on you. That's interesting to me because I was a child when I first saw the film. But
Okay.
you know, I'd seen so much more fucked up shit than that by that point that it didn't faze me.
Right. And that's fair. That's fair to say. And I had, honestly, when I was a child, I had probably seen more gruesome, things in horror films and stuff like that as well. I think that there's. I'm trying to decide if it was more of a writing thing or not, or a performance. I guess it must have been, though. I agree with you all in that the handwriting, and watching that deteriorate and like his grasp of the English language and stuff as he's becoming more and more like a creature. And what I remember most about that thinking was, for either of you who are video game people, in the first Resident Evil game, there is a room in the mansion where you come upon somebody's diary, and he has been bitten or been infected by the T-virus in some way or another. So he's slowly but surely becoming a zombie. But he writes in his journal every day, and every day his English is worse. And so you're seeing this deterioration of his humanity. It very much reminded me of that. Like every time he typed something out, it was just a little bit worse, and the grammar was weird, or it was missing punctuation and stuff like that, or he's writing it on the chalkboard, and his very clean cursive that you saw earlier on is starting to devolve into this, chicken scratch, Brandon looking handwriting. And and like the communicating via the banging on the table and stuff like that, the 1 pound for yes and the 2 pounds for no and stuff like that. Like I thought that was a really cool, like he was still more human at that point, and still very much into this idea that like, this can be undone. We just got to find this fly. And so that's something that's worth bringing up. In this version of the film, Dr. Andre, or I don't know if he's a doctor, I guess. He's some kind of scientist. Andre Delambre believes that he has created a teleporting device where it disintegrates something on one side inside of a box, and then it's able to transport its atoms to another box and then reform it. So in this one, it's his hand and his head that end up getting swapped when he tries to disintegrate himself and reintegrate himself into the other box, but there was a fly in the mechanism. And they became crossed that way. Evidently, I forget who it was that suggested it, but one of the members of the crew, or the cast, wanted it to be similar to what ends up happening in the 86 version of the film. But I think the studio pushed back because they said it would cost too much money. So yeah, the story is solid. I really enjoyed the structure. Like I said, I like that it's held up on both ends by the crime piece, the murder mystery part. Because I had no clue that it took that angle. So what about the 86 film? We'll go back through.
Well, if I could tag up one last thing on the 58
one.
Yeah.
Please do.
And as you're talking about the transformation, because as we see what I call the fly man, I had the fly man and the man fly. So the fly man's the one that we see that ultimately gets, head smash guillotined and such, that went from scientist to fly. As we see him losing grips with his humanity and becoming more fly-like even in his thinking, I guess.
Yeah.
I had to ask, I'm like, so in that case, did the fly become more man, or are they both him? It was a big question for me, and that's partly what I thought made that penultimate scene with him in the web so horrifying. Like, I'm sure it's horrifying for any fly to be caught in a spider's web, but then to also gain this new level of consciousness of a human, and then have to look into the fucking 20 evil eyes of a spider. that really added to that to me, and still, like, I still had that question in my head by the end. I'm like, so were both versions him, or was it like each one kind of becoming more like the other? I guess I don't know.
So,
well, I mean,
go ahead. Andre got the head and the arm of the fly, and they swapped. So he had Andre's head and one of his arms. And while they had that physical thing going, Andre also gradually lost his his human cognitive abilities and descended towards, like fly brain, whereas the fly remained a fly, but he got like human level sentience. So when the spider was approaching on him, he was reasonably terrified because he knew that he was about to die. That's why he ended up getting crushed in the end, because that's not Andre, and there's no way to bring back Andre, so they figured might as well just screw the whole thing and pretend like he killed himself.
Okay. That makes sense.
So at that point, is it more the fly that was taking over? But why would the fly choose to be killed?
What do you mean?
So maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. I thought you meant that over time, the fly man started to become more fly, and then the man fly took on more of Andre's consciousness.
Right, but you can lose your mind, so to speak, while still retaining like what's going on around you. So he recognizes that he was going downhill mentally, sort of like a person with dementia can be like, I don't want to do this anymore, and express frustration there. It was sort of like that. So once he recognized that this was the end and there was no going back, and this was it was only going to get worse from here, he figured to just put a stop to it while he was ahead.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because I mean, to that point, the fly man. Which one's the one in the web? I forget now.
I had it as Flyman is Andre with the head and the hand, and Manfly is the one in the web.
Gotcha. So Manfly, Manfly is showing an appropriate level of terror because what is it? It's humans and maybe a couple other species. Or I don't even know about that. Aren't we the only species that has an understanding that we are going to die eventually?
I wouldn't think so. I've had one of my dogs in the past. I'm pretty sure he knew what was coming as he descended in health. So I don't think they can understand it to the same ability that we can, maybe. And that's not to say that we fully understand it either, because there's still debates on afterlife and what happens next, and if anything happens next. But I just say it's nowhere. The concept isn't there to that degree, but I feel like they still know that it happens and it's something to be avoided.
Yeah. So if I remember right, I think some animals have places they specifically go to die. Like the elephant graveyard. That. To Josh's point, though, I don't know if the elephant is holding the skull of his father up and, performing a soliloquy about the nature of existence. But, they seem to conceive of death.
Sure. Yeah, and I think maybe I'm not necessarily thinking of death. I think maybe I'm more thinking of, like, mortality. Like, a creature, I think most animals recognize when they're in danger and going to be killed, which is why they have defense mechanisms and natural things that they've evolved in order to avoid predators and things like that. So I think I was mixing that stuff up.
Well,
so a fly would definitely have some kind of a response if it were stuck in a spider's web, because it understands that means it's been caught by a predator.
Like I said, and because dealing with pets, shit goes awry a lot, and they'll recognize when another one has passed. And they'll grieve over it. Not just like they're gone, maybe they'll come back, but they'll know that they're not coming back. So I'd say that they have, like I said, not as deep an understanding, but they recognize, what it is and that life ends and whatnot.
So that kind of cements it for me. I was going to try to tie it together and be like, yeah, it was kind of a nice thing because a fly doesn't really understand like the danger it's in. So as the fly man becomes more fly, it's like, yeah, before I lose complete sense of myself, why don't we go ahead and just put me in the pneumatic press, because this isn't going to get any better. But in the meantime, the man fly becomes more aware of the danger he's in, blah, 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 blah. But no, he should have understood the danger either way. He just still knew that the situation was dire and that it needed to be ended.
Well, it works in a different way, too, I think, because, how many times have we all been like Vincent Price? They're sitting in a bench next to a spider's web,
Yeah.
Or God knows, a bird eating a worm and many other things that happen in the animal kingdom, and we don't hear them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We don't hear the worms and the flies and so many other creatures scream when they're being eaten not too far from us.
Yeah.
So in that case, I think that, it growing the man's head and voice and all that does add in that way too, you know?
Sure. It makes it just that much more like bone chilling.
Yes.
Thinking about those kinds of things. So what about 86? So in 1986, David Cronenberg makes a remake of the 58 original. It was released on August 15th, 1986. So your boy B still wasn't alive yet. They had a $15 million budget. The movie made over 60 worldwide. Worth noting, Chris Wallace Inc. is the first billed credit when the end credits start rolling, which makes a lot of sense. And from what I read, Stuart Kornfeld, the producer of this film, pretty much at that point when they made the decision to list Chris Wallace Inc. as the first billed credit, he basically leaned over to him and said, "You know you're going to win an Oscar for this, right?" And that's exactly what happened. What else? I had a couple more things. This was originally supposed to be a Tim Burton project, evidently, which would have been wildly bizarre. And I also read that both Michael Keaton and Mel Gibson were offered the role of Seth Brundle, and they both declined. And
there were a few others I read about that they passed up.
Really?
On. Some I was like, holy shit, what would that have been like?
I mean, even Gibson, to me, evidently he declined it to do Lethal Weapon. Mel Gibson as Seth Brundle, I don't know. I can kind of see Keaton more.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why. I don't have a good reason.
Yeah, Keaton might have been pretty good. I mean, he has similar kind of he has some of those interesting ticks, kind of like Goldblum does.
Yeah, he's got eccentricity and yeah. I think it would have worked that way. Mel Gibson, I would have never thought to put Mel Gibson in that role. I don't think of him as an eccentric scientist.
No.
Last thing before we dive into it a little more, Cronenberg evidently meant this as a metaphor for like disease and aging. But a lot of people, once The Fly kind of got into the zeitgeist, evidently were seeing it more as a metaphor for the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And Cronenberg has basically, once that kind of started coming out, he was like, yeah, I could see that too. And he gave people the go-ahead to like, you can totally see it that way, I get it. So, what did you all think about, or what else, whether if you want to throw other factoids out there, I'm totally cool with that, or how do you feel about the writing of the 86 remake? It is definitely different.
Yeah, different, most notably at first to me was structurally, because rather than the kind of mystery plot where we start off with some kind of tragedy and then kind of have to backtrack and then push through, this one, I was amazed at how fast it starts.
Mm-hmm.
Like the opening scene, we don't get a hello, how are you? He's already explaining what his machine does. Yeah. So we get the maker and we get the person that's going to be with him through this journey right in that first scene. Second scene, we're already seeing the machine.
Yeah.
So I was pretty blown away.
It is the coldest of cold opens.
Dude, just like straight on the tracks, which I appreciate, to be honest. Sure. I appreciate both of these movies for just being under 2 hours. So kicking into that gear right out the gate was pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. I say it's a little more typical of this type of story. I think the structure that this one takes, because we just move again A to Z and see this gradual downfall. Yeah, I think again the structure itself in the mid to later parts, I don't know if it would work without that work of Chris Walas. Yeah. Because again, if you're going to have so much of the journey being this downward spiral physical transformation, and you don't have an artist like Walas on there, then it's not going to come off very well. Otherwise, it's going to be more of a B movie in some ways than the original, you know?
Sure.
So, I also found like the choice to have Brundle be almost more fascinated than horrified at his transformation was a really cool choice. Yeah. And again, I could only see Goldblum. Actually, now that you mentioned it though, like I could see Keaton kind of pulling that off as well.
Definitely, I think so.
Yeah. But also, I read a little bit on some of the earlier drafts of it this morning when I was at work. And I do like that they move the scene of Gina Davis's character giving birth to the maggot earlier, and that was almost going to be like kind of a, you thought it was the end, then oh shit, she wakes up kind of a scene, right at the end, which I'm like, a little cheesy, but yeah, that just keeps it, you understand better why she is looking to abort the pregnancy at that point. Definitely. Speaking of though, we get at least like 2 or 3 steps into the transformation before she realizes that she's pregnant, which I thought was also a good choice. So we don't just have like the potential of something weird. We know this could be something very, very fucked up for this pregnancy.
Catastrophic.
And last thing I really liked in the writing, and this is the thing that a lot of people point out, but the little time gaps that we get, that we spend away from Brundlefly, like we'll just be with Gina Davis's character and her editor, and it really adds to that kind of tension of like, what is this guy gonna look like next? Jesus, last time his ear and his teeth were falling out. The next time he looks like some kind of, I wrote bubbly golem in my notes at that midpoint of his transformation. So yeah, every time it's just really like ramping up the tension and the potential horror of what this guy's going to be next. I thought that was a really cool choice.
I like it.
I had some of the same notes again, because and originally the script for this was supposed to be more so just a remake with updated tech and effects of the original, before they went in a completely different direction with the script. And it had Wallace, and I think he really carried the brunt of a lot of what makes this film so great. Like you said, I also like that they took it in the opposite direction, and instead of him screwing up the experiment and then being like, I gotta fix this, he's more so, I need to see what happens next, or what's gonna happen, because they establish out the jump that he's curious of the effects that the machines have on like a living organism. So it's more so not a race to find the cure to it, but to show the various stages of his deterioration. And like B said, I got that old age reference. Even as a kid, it seemed sort of prevalent. Because, so you have this cocky scientist who's he just has his new invention. He's born, so to speak. And he has a life-altering event. And you can compare the effects that the machine had on him with, like, going through puberty. And as he gets more and more, as he evolves more and more into this creature, into the fly, he eventually loses his sanity, much like the original, but whereas the other one, he comes out and he's already this creature, this is more gradual. So you can see, rather than just, more subtle writing, you can see both physically and mentally the changes he's going through. And by the time we get to the end, much like in the original, he comes to terms with the fact that, this has to end. And I feel like, because of, and this is more of the effects aspect, but they tie together right here, so I wasn't sure how to include it. Because of the creature, the movements, the look of it, it feels more sympathetic to me at the end. Whereas the original's ending, while I think the help me is such an iconic line, it is a bit silly. And this one's more somber in that regard.
Yeah.
And in the original story, by the way, which they veered away from this in both, unless it was like an alternate ending or something, because I haven't seen all the cuts of this film yet. But in his love interest in the story, she ends up killing herself too, for the assisted suicide, because she can't live with it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So they cut that in the original script because they thought it was too dark, since you already have one suicide, And for one reason or another, when they remade it, I guess they still chose not to go that route and just have the one, which you could argue what is more impactful, one or two people dying, but the focus is on the fly person more so than the effects it has on someone else. And that's something that can be touched on in, like, I mean, I haven't seen any of the sequels to either of these films, just the standalones, so I don't know if that ever comes up, but more of the focus is put on Andre or Brundle in both.
Yeah, no, that really good observation on the aging part too. I wouldn't have thought of that when he first transforms and he's got the that need for sugar and he's got this increased sexual potency and all that. Yeah. You also made me think of something else I think was an improvement on this, Josh. To your point where you see what the effects are on the person around the person, I felt that much more with Gina Davis's character in this versus like say the wife in the original.
Right.
I agree.
I think they
100%
with
that.
Well, to various degrees. I mean, I like while I have to pick a one or the other in each category for these, I think they both do all the categories fairly well.
I agree.
And I had a hard time deciding if it was writing or performance for Helene, but I knew it was the performance from Gina. Like, it was her performance that was making me buy into the horror of what she was going to more than it was anything that was necessarily written for her.
Well, and bringing it back, I think it is a writing choice, though, to have Gina Davis sit with Brundle through this entire journey for the majority of the film, almost the entire film, you know, versus seeing kind of traumatized aftermath, and then she almost seems like, again, that part actually goes a little bit more performance in the original, where the wife, she seems to me a little too chill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
After they have her in like bed and she's looking for the fly, and granted she has some anxieties about finding this fly, but it's I don't know, the hills and valleys were a little bit weirder for me in the old one. And again, I think a great writing choice, if you trust your performers and your effects artists, is to have that relationship sit through the entire thing and to have somebody have to witness this disintegration and downfall.
I think in the original, part of the reason why it was as good as making Helena seem as nuts as she was the housekeeper. Because you needed a character to essentially play foil to her madness, wondering, why is everybody looking for this damn fly? Because she freaks out when she tries to kill it. She's like, well, it's a fly. You kill him. You don't catch him and release him. So I think that was
unless you're Philippe, because he's a weird kid.
I think that was I think that was a really good point in the original Fly's direction as far as writing goes. Having someone there to, essentially be normal outside of the events of the film, like an outsider looking in. Like, this is not standard what's going on, because she doesn't know. Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that if I take it from a dialogue perspective, and it's two films from two different eras, so it's obvious that some of this stuff is just going to be a sign of the times. But the dialogue in the 86 version is just snappier. It's a lot more clever, and this is going to more come into play in performance. But like, movies and filmmaking were just different in the 80s than they were in the 50s. Sometimes the things in the 50s still feel like they're being filmed or performed as if they're in a play. And you don't get that by the 80s. Like, that part of filmmaking has gone out the window. But there's just such great lines in this. Like, prior to Brundle going through the telepod on his own, Gina Davis's character, Veronica, tells him, "I have residue of an old life I still need to scrape off my shoe." Like, it's just, that's such a, I like that snappiness of her dialogue. The "be afraid, be very afraid" line, which I feel like has really become like a cultural thing, even though people probably don't know where that came from anymore. But like, this is the film that started it.
Which I did not know till just this morning reading about that movie. I had no idea this originated that. I was like, I thought that was something that people had said since time immemorial.
Right. I really love the insect politics speech.
Yeah.
That whole chunk of the film is amazing. I have a quote here. I am an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it, but now the dream is over and the insect is awake. And to dilute that down even further, he ends it by basically, because she's telling him, I don't understand, like, what is it that you're saying? Because he's getting really philosophical and all this other stuff. And he just says, I'm saying I'll hurt you if you stay. And he's telling her to get the fuck out of there. Just like so cool. And obviously a lot of that also comes from Goldblum's performance and his delivery, which we'll get to. I'll bring up the insect politics speech again, but really it's one of my favorite like little pieces of dialogue from a movie. Like it joined the list of some of my favorite dialogue from a movie. I really like that part. Another thing that I want to bring up is I got two more I think. The transformation. So we kind of touched on it about how he's a lot more fascinated and he's more in this place where at first it's kind of a disaster when he realizes, oh, this is what went wrong. But then as things are changing with him, it's very much this place where he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I got it out of order. That's before he knew that a fly was in the telepod with him. He just thinks that going from one telepod to another rearranges his molecules and stuff in their like most optimal form, which is why he's able to do all of the parallel bars, kind of acrobatics, and the handstand on the chair, doing push-ups and things like that. These incredible feats of strength that he would have never been able to do before. And I love that there is this slow deterioration. He turns into this thing that's almost, he's 100% id. He is just all of a sudden motivated by his instincts alone. Like he knows he wants to eat, he knows he wants to multiply, so that's where this big sex drive comes from. Like his apartment turns shitty, he just trashes everything because that kind of stuff doesn't matter to him anymore. And he's got this arrogance about him, this confidence. He's more manic, like as eccentric as Jeff Goldblum can be in a performance and things like that. He's turned up to 11, where he's speaking very quickly and almost moving his head around and moving his hands around and gesticulating and all this other stuff, almost like you would want if you were to watch a fly sitting on a table. And this is before he ever really starts to show much of the physical changes. I just thought that was really cool. And then the last thing I want to point out is Stathis, her ex-boyfriend, who is now her editor because she's a journalist. I thought he was so well written because I went on a roller coaster ride of he's an asshole, he's the piece of shit ex-boyfriend, he's a creep and all this other stuff. But wait, no, maybe he's not, and I kept going up and down with that, where in reality, he's just this guy that clearly loved her and it didn't work out. And he even states in the film, like, I just want to be a part of your life. I don't want you to shut me out forever. And so if that means you want me to kind of give you my blessing of like, go and do this project with this guy, and I can tell you're kind of into him, but I'm just going to have to accept that because I want to be part of your life. And obviously toward the end, he's trying to save her from Brundlefly and make sure that she's safe at his own personal loss, as we find, when he gets his hand and his foot melted off. And then like being there for her at the abortion appointment, like he's shown to be very very caring and things like that about getting that set up for her. It's just, there's an ebb and a flow there. Like, he definitely has some creepy tendencies too, like where he follows her around and goes to the place where she's shopping and stuff like that and is kind of spying on her. But it's not done so much that he's like a mustache twirling villain. It's just, he's a jealous ex-boyfriend. He's a normal guy who was hurt in a scenario and wants that girl back, but it's becoming more and more apparent that that's not going to happen. But like, he's still playful with her, and like he makes dirty jokes at her and stuff, but to me, that read as being very much part of their relationship and not him being completely awful. And of course, she just kind of tells him to fuck off and like moves on and stuff like that. But I thought his writing was very interesting because by the end of it, I was like, he was not a complete piece of trash. Like, he wasn't great, but he wasn't a complete piece of trash. And I think it took some very kind of clever scripting to make you not just like want Brundlefly to melt him completely. Because I didn't want to see him get destroyed.
Well, I'd differ with you just a little bit there. I honestly thought he was kind of weirdly obtuse, like some of the humor and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I was actually kind of surprised that Gina Davis's character would actually keep him around, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the other part, too, I noticed, I'm like, and this isn't necessarily positive or negative, but just an observation, like, boy, this character wouldn't fly now. And apologies for apologies for the pun in there, but yeah. Going back
appreciated it.
One quick comment on something you said too, the fly that dreamt you was a man part.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the timing of this, but I was like, man, I wonder if Cronenberg and those guys were reading Alan Moore's Swamp Thing at the time. Because it really like keyed into that a lot to me, or reminded me of that, I should say.
Well, the Andre fly, or the Andre fly from the 58 film definitely looked like a creature that Swamp Thing would have fought.
Oh yeah.
Any more notes about writing before we kind of make a distinction one way or the other? No? So what do you think? If you were to kind of give the Duke to one film or the other, which way would you guys lean?
I'm going to have to go 86. It was a closer race than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I give a lot of credit to the writer of the 58 version for offering a little more than you had to for what was, I'm sure, originally proposed as almost nothing more than a B movie.
Sure.
And again, I thought that the climax was actually very effective, and the kind of rising action up to that was also very great. But ultimately, I think just the downward spiral. And like you said, there's a lot of great, just quotable philosophical lines in the 86 version. And I just think ultimately it was more about execution than just structure and potential of the structure. So I got to give the Duke to 86.
Okay. Josh, what about you?
I had this incredibly close also, because I think the writing in the original 58 Fly is superb, and I love the way it's written to be structured in a different way, especially compared to the films of the time. But the 86 version took that original idea and turned it into a metaphor. And, you know, as you said, there are different interpretations of what it could mean, but the fact that they took what... Mm-hmm. Not that the original one didn't have meaning to it, but it took it and it was like, okay, how do we explore this idea on another level and add layers to it? I think that lended itself into getting the leg up on the predecessor.
Okay. And I think I find myself in the same place as you guys. I liked the 58 film a lot more than I thought I was going to. I think I went into it from an era of, this is an older film, so I know that a lot of the techniques and things like that are going to be, you know, a little bit out of fashion from what I'm used to. And I was definitely surprised by how gruesome the film was, and I did really very much enjoy the book ending of the murder mystery narrative that went along with the mad scientist kind of stuff. I like that they did that. I think, Cody, you worded that really well by saying doing a lot more than what was expected, probably. Putting a lot more effort into it than maybe was even originally intended. And I think it really did show in the end product. But I just really enjoyed the 86 Fly, the punchy dialogue, the spin that they took on the Fly transformation. Like, I really felt the danger in there, and I think that was born out of, the way that it was written, whereas the 58 one, I wasn't getting that same kind of tone. because I think it was just striking a different tone. But I think the 86 one was more what I was looking for as it pertains to a mad scientist being turned into a giant fly. So yeah, let's talk about technical stuff. I think what we're going to find here, folks, is that this is going to end up being the first ever two-parter for Screen Sermon, because when we're going to break a film down by individual criteria like this, and really kind of go into a deep dive, it's just going to end up being a longer episode. And so I think it just naturally makes sense, rather than to continue putting 2 to 2.5 hour episodes out there, let's break them up for you all. That way you can, hear us out for an hour or 45 minutes or something like that, and then move on to a different podcast until next week, and then we can give you the second part. So let's talk about the technical aspect, because I have a feeling that for all of us, there might be not necessarily a deluge of information there. So let's talk about technical stuff. Cody, what did you have?
First technical thing, actually, this might get... I hate to burst the bubble, but this might get a little bit longer on my end than I thought.
That's okay.
So here's something that excited me a lot when I first hit play on this movie, and I got those, the 58 version that is, and I got to see those opening credits, is shot in CinemaScope.
Yes.
This always makes me very excited when I see that at the top of a movie. And
now let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. So
okay.
Do you... Okay.
Great news.
I was going to say, can you educate me?
I spent like a good evening looking into this, because I realized I had it a little bit mixed up. And part of it was, I thought what CinemaScope, or what later became simply known as anamorphic photography, or cinematography, I suppose, was not exactly what I thought it was. So what it is a way to shoot something that will look widescreen, but on a 35, I think I got that right, millimeter camera.
Okay.
It's a way of faking widescreen, basically. John Carpenter used this quite a bit with Panavision later.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what I had thought it was you get like the shallow and deep focus simultaneously, which is apparently a split diopter shot.
Mm-hmm.
But
I didn't notice any split diopter in the film, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there.
No, and a lot of the backgrounds weren't deep enough to really pull something like that off. You know what I mean? We get a lot inside the labyrinth.
You know what though? Manfly and the spider. That was probably a split diopter, because they were both in focus.
Possibly. See, that's something I'd have to look into, because I had that in my notes as well, because the Manfly, I forget what this technique is called, but he looked like they kind of patched him in. You know what I mean? Okay. Clearly shot like, some close-up of a spider like rolling up to the camera. I mean, God bless that cameraman. And and then found some way of getting the kind of, I don't know, like, I guess semi-animated Manfly in there. Like, again, I don't know. But there's a great video on YouTube called The Story of CinemaScope for anybody who wants to look more into that. It was a huge... thought of as gimmick at the time by 20th Century Fox, trying to get people back in the theaters because TV had kept so many people at home. So this was one of those that wasn't, as cheesy as say 3D, a pure gimmick like that. And it actually had a huge influence on just cinematography in general. And there's also a much shorter, quicker breakdown on sci-hi.org of just widescreen and CinemaScope. So, there was my short little essay. But
I appreciate it.
that piece of it and the way they colored this movie, because if I want to say that it was colored after the fact, the 58 Fly. Yeah. Man, that stuff just really did it for me. That's one thing I do love about movies of that time. Whenever you see Technicolor and CinemaScope stuff, man, I don't know what it is. It's one of those kind of just visceral things that gets me aesthetically. Yeah. And also, I thought I really liked the lab. If I remember right,
I did too.
They built that from scratch. The lab in the factory. I thought just that opening shots of the older guy at the factory, looking for the cat, and I thought that looked pretty great too. It looked like something out of a Dickens story or something. A little bit more modern, obviously. And where was I?
Talking about the lab.
Yeah. Sets were just awesome. I wish more movies nowadays wouldn't so heavily rely on CGing things or always having 10-foot ceilings and all this kind of a shit. There's something kind of nice about like a cozy little like weird laboratory to me. Again, this is why I used to love watching Mystery Science Theater so much. Oh, two more quick things technically.
Sure.
I thought the lack of score kind of made things a little bit dry through some parts of it, and I kind of understood why. There's pieces where you want to hear the fly buzzing in the background.
Sure.
So I get that, but I thought they could have used a little bit more. I mean, it kicked up for me a little bit. I know I said the opposite in terms of the writing, but when we get into the beginnings of the flashback and they go to see the ballet and all that, real quick little montage. But again, it gave you a nice transition into the next scene, and you kind of, again, gives you a little bit something more than just image and performance.
This is going back to the writing real quick before we move on to either your next point. I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off.
Not at all.
During that ballet scene, there was little bits of like funny little humor in there in the 58 fly that I did appreciate. It was another reason why it kept me like on the fence about which one I was going to end up liking more. But when Andre and Helene scoot into one another to be more, I guess, like intimately close while they're watching the ballet, they totally scoot in front of this guy that's sitting behind him. And the dude that's performing, like the extra, he looks so annoyed and is trying to like scoot his chair over so he can see the ballet past them and stuff like that. And it's one of those things where, like, if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't have noticed it. But I thought it was such a good little performance that guy put on. And that's the only time he's on screen.
That's pretty awesome. I didn't even notice that.
So, Code, did I just cut you off? Didn't you say you had two, or did you already drop them? I'm sorry.
No, I just checked the notes again. That's everything I really had on technical aspects.
Gotcha. Josh, what about you for 58 fly?
Almost not a shitting thing, because while the people I work with on student films and whatnot are well versed in equipment and everything, one of my best friends is a DP. I have no idea what the hell he does. I just go where he points and do what I'm told. But a few things I have of note are that I actually liked the score / lack thereof, because, like I said before, it puts itself way different than other 50. It's late 50s, but it puts itself a little bit away from some of the other films of the era, because you had pretty much a paint by numbers type of science fiction film, the type of thing that you'd see at a drive-in, and this is still that, but it was played more straight. I don't know if it's necessarily a good or bad thing. I liked it because it was different. The cinematographer for this was Carl Struss, and I don't know if you're familiar, but this might be his first color film. I'm not sure, but it's the first one I know of. He was the cinematographer on a lot of 1930s horror films. He did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Island of Lost Souls and a bunch of films in that vein. Like Universal Monsters horror adjacent horror films, I guess. Which is funny because growing up, the reason I put this on is because I was 6, 5, maybe a little bit younger, because I had such an affinity for those early Universal horror films, and I thought this was one of them. When I went back and watched today, I think it was the first time I'd seen it in color. Either that, or I just completely misremembered it, because I had a feeling that it was in black and white the first time I saw it, and it might have been, and it might have just been something wrong with my copy, or just a false memory of seeing that. So it was sort of neat to go in, not necessarily blind, but looking at it different than how I remembered it, going, oh wow, it's actually in color, and it looks pretty good compared to, a lot of newer films of the 50s, because when I picture films of that era, it's, stuff that you'd see on Mystery Science Theater, and usually the color grading can be not great. You get a lot of colors that don't mesh well, and this has a certain pseudo noir vibe, I think, in its tone and palette, which is helped by the writing and the structure and how it sets itself to be. So I think that all worked. And I had another point, but I do not remember what it was. But it doesn't, because most of my technical things that I had written down end up more fitted for the effects. So I'll get further into it later.
Okay. And thank you for mentioning Karl Struss. Just a couple more movies from his filmography. The original Ben-Hur, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, The Great Dictator with Charlie Chaplin, and a little movie called Gone with the Wind.
Whoa, okay.
That's 4 of about 50 on his selected filmography. So.
Yeah, he's an acclaimed cinematographer. So, Yeah,
I guess he's all right.
He'll do. Any schmuck can hold a camera. And to your point, also, from what I read about the black and white thing, evidently this film was always in color, but a lot of people have had a case of the Mandela effect about it, where because the 2 sequels that came after it are black and white films because they had lower budgets, for some reason people have invoked this thought process that the original is also in black and white when it actually never was.
Weird.
Yeah, I know.
I've not
Mandela
seen the
effect's
sequels.
I haven't either. But that's what it said. I only went. So this was I never answered this off the jump. I asked you guys about it. This was my first time watching the 58 Fly, and the static image that you get of the film when you hover over it on HBO Max, it shows a black and white scene, but that scene is not in the film, so I don't know what that's about. And then the 86 Fly I've seen before, but it had probably been like 20 years since I watched it. My technical pieces are few and far between, so I like the lab set. I made a note of that. There's something about it actually being there, and the characters are actually in that room, and they put the time and effort to make this thing look like a scientist's setup. I remarked that it kind of looks like a doomsday bunker. I don't know exactly what it is. It might be those big sliding metal doors that make me feel that way.
From army surplus equipment that was left over. So,
well, there you go. Maybe that's why too. It's got a vibe to it like that. Sign of the times, I think. Editing back then was what it was. There's lots of dissolves and fades between scenes. They don't do just hard cutting of any kind. They have to dissolve or fade from one thing to the next, which is fine. But it does, and the wavy screen for the flashback, where it's almost like you're looking at it through water. That's become not even a trope. It's become a joke these days to do that kind of stuff. Back then, I think it was just the norm. Yeah, exactly. The whimsical kind of orchestral pieces. At times this is a fantasy movie, where he's doing this really cool thing where he's able to, disassemble and reassemble matter and send it, and it's going to completely change the world and transportation and all that stuff. There's a certain fantasy element to it, and you get this whimsical kind of orchestral stuff, specifically during the flashback and specifically during family moments. When they're out in the garden, you get these kind of nice orchestral things, and it is, it's in there along with these very colorful backgrounds that you get whenever you're in the outside scenes, in the garden and stuff like that. All the colors really pop, and also I really dug the horn blasts that you get when anything tense happens. You get those really big brass sounds. That are supposed to be unsettling. I thought those were effective. But yeah, I didn't really notice tons of stuff about the way things were shot specifically. Sound design and stuff like that was what it was. I really enjoyed the sound that the boxes make when the teleportation actually happens, that loud crackle sound, and they end up using it for the telepods in the 86 version as well. All of the weird beeps and boops that happen prior to that big moment are dated feeling, very much just like what did a spaceship kind of sound like in the 50s. We've obviously changed that in modern time. These are very much like what did science machines sound like in the 50s, and it's just very much like beeps and boops. But that big crackle like explosion thing was really cool, and so I thought that was a neat, however the hell they made it, I thought it was really cool. So yeah, that was my notes for the 58 technical stuff.
I forgot that score and music was going to be part of this category, because in that case, I mean, I got to say that it would be kind of hard for the 58 one to compete with 86, and for a very important reason, which we'll get to next. I forgot we weren't talking about 86 yet. I was about to jump straight into it. I'm like, oh right, we're still.
Oh, I just wrapped up 58, so you can go right into it.
Okay, cut out that last part and make it look like I made a perfect transition. All right. For one very important reason, one very important name, and that is Howard Shore, who did the score for the 86 version. Howard Shore is one of those names for me. I love his stuff. There's only a handful of composers that I really pay attention to, and Shore is one of them. I mean, he's probably most known now for doing the score for the Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson ones. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I thought his score for the 86 Fly was really great.
Yeah.
Had that like nice mix from like I guess what kind of like some of what Bernard Herrmann used to be able to do, where it can sound like kind of foreboding and tragic, but it's not like, overbearing. You don't get the feeling like, okay, goddamn, I get it. Back up, Howard. But
what I got from it, just to interrupt you real quick, because I think it's pertinent to your point. From the opening credits alone, there's a certain curiosity in the music which fits with Brundle's, like, his interest in the things that he's doing and finding out more about it and things like that. Yeah. But there's also a lot of foreboding of bad shit is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And they give that to you just in the opening, like, song, the song that you get over the opening credits. Sorry, you can go ahead. I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, curiosity is a perfect, I think, description of that, because I was just thinking, like, that very opening string thing from, say, like, Lord of the Rings. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It has that feeling of, like, just, looking through a keyhole to, like, find what's on the other side or something like that. But since we're on the 86 one, technically speaking, I thought it was a little bit more, if I remember right, and again, I don't have a shot list ready, but it felt a little bit more static in like the photography, which is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think it added to, not added to, actually, it didn't take away from the overall effect of the makeup and the performances. Sometimes, just a straight ahead composition is all you need. But I thought he did a good job, Cronenberg and whoever his DP was, of finding some interesting angles within the laboratory. Because you always got a sense of that warehouse kind of loft space, It was just cavernous enough to feel add a little bit to the foreboding element of it,
Josh, technical stuff for 86?
So, David Cronenberg, the films that he works on, he has a few people that are, he collaborates with a lot. His cinematographer in this film was Mark Irwin, who's collaborated with him on Videodrome, Scanners, as well as some other films. He was the cinematographer on Scream and the Blob, the remake Blob.
The 88 one?
So,
nice.
He's one of those people that are handpicked by Cronenberg to come work on his projects, as well as Howard Shore, who's worked on him on Crash and Crimes of the Future, which just came out last year. And I think he may have also done Videodrome, but I'm not sure on that. I know he did Silence of the Lambs and Ed Wood, which I both like.
Oh wow!
Oh wow!
Yeah.
I love both of those movies.
He did do Videodrome and The Dead Zone, which is probably my favorite Cronenberg movie.
Oh really?
Yeah.
And he also did Seven, but I haven't seen Seven, and I still need to because my wife quotes it at me all the time.
It's a good one.
He also, I'm just running through them right now, but he also did D2 The Mighty Ducks.
Nice.
Dumb and Dumber and Kingpin. So man, he's been all over.
Yeah.
So he also did I think he did a Kevin Smith film, and I don't remember which one it was, but if I had to guess, I would say Dogma.
That would have been my guess too.
The orchestral shit in Dogma.
Yeah.
And which will kind of spoil a little bit, which one I like here, but he took after composing the 86 Fly, he composed an opera based on the movie The Fly.
Oh, nice. I've heard of this.
I have yet to see that, but he went ahead and made that too. The music in this film really works for me. I don't have any real notable shots off of it. Well, I mean, I have notable shots, but for other reasons that I'll get into in other categories. But the style of shots themselves, I don't really have anything to comment on there, other than everything works to create, a sort of more erratic. I don't know exactly what it is, but you get the feeling that you're going on sort of a journey with Brundle, in a sense, because shots start off well, neat and composed, and throughout the film, they get, not like Raimi-esque, but they get a little bit more varied in their styles as the film goes on, sort of as if the person viewing the film is going through a transformation with the character.
On a quick note, those titles I was mentioning earlier were Mark Irwin and not Howard Shore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
With Dead Zone and...
Yeah, all of those.
Scanners and stuff. Okay.
And Freddy Got Fingered, apparently, so...
The cinema classic.
Yeah, I would say that modern classic, yeah.
So like I mentioned already, the music kind of hits different right from the jump. And technology is just different, right? I mean, the capability to build, certain machines or certain miniatures of things and stuff like that, they just have more options because it's a more modern film. The telepods and how cool they are, and how cool they sound when they open, and that kind of like that hermetic seal being broken and the fog spilling out and stuff like that. It's just super cool as compared to 4 panes of glass, with a light bulb over top of it, kind of thing. So it's just the disintegrator reintegrator versus the 2 telepods. It's just very different. And it's funny because Gina Davis makes a quip, or Veronica, I guess, the character makes a quip about you made the world's largest microwave. And it's just funny because the ones in the original, I think, look more like a microwave than the telepods do.
We've welded together 12 easy bake ovens that can turn a man into another man.
The final teleportation sound, like I said, that big crackling bang, is essentially the same. I don't know that it's exactly the same. They may have tweaked it a little bit, but it's very similar. And obviously, I think it was at least sampled from the original and then maybe fiddled with after. They do a lot of dissolves in the editing in this film, too. So, me bitching about it. I didn't really bitch about it, but me mentioning it for the 58 version, they do it here, too. So it's not like it's a lost art. They still do dissolves in modern film as well. And then the other thing I noted was, toward the end, they use this really cool shot looking up at Stathis, almost like the Tarantino shot, where you're inside of a container of some kind, looking up and out at the people who are looking down into it. It's not quite that angle, but it's close. And Stathis is in Brundle's lab, and you're kind of more looking at the vast ceiling that's above him. And they use this really cool shot to show that there's a shadow up there, so you don't quite see Brundlefly, but you see the shadow up there, and it's combined with this really high-pitched whine noise, which very much sounds like the buzzing of a fly. And then the attack happens pretty much right after that, so it's just this really cool setup right before Brundle kind of reveals himself to Stathis. That was the one real use of a camera technique that jumped out at me. And what I can say about the 86 Fly from a technical aspect, like if we're talking about cinematography and things like that specifically, I think the performances are what this, and the effects are what this movie leaned into, and so a lot of that other stuff kind of gets lost in the process. I'm sure they tried to do some cool things with shots like that. That was literally the only one that I noticed, though, because your eyes are so glued to Jeff Goldblum specifically that you're not as easily paying attention to like how the cameras moved and how did they set that up and stuff like that. So that was my kind of quick notes about technical aspects. So if you're comfortable, Cody, who gets the thumbs up for your technical aspects between the 58 and the 86 version?
Another one that was tighter than I would have expected. Honestly, the 58 had a lot more going for it than I had originally anticipated. But I think overall the 86 one was just more effective. Like I said, there were some camera movements in the 58 one. Like, while fun, I like kind of an active camera sometimes. That's why I like Spielberg. That's why I like the earlier Paul Thomas Anderson movies. But in this one, I didn't know if they were always that necessary. Set design, I love the 58 one as well. And again, that's just more of a personal aesthetic thing. And like I said, the CinemaScope kind of look is also just a huge thing for me. But I think overall the 86 one, it holds together better with all of its technical aspects. You probably phrased it a little bit better there at the end of yours. But yeah, I think just the whole meal of the 86's technical aspects fit together better for me. And again, Howard Shore is just like the ace up the sleeve.
Yeah.
So I give the win here to 86 again.
Okay, so it's 2-0-86 for you.
Yes.
Okay. And Josh, what about you?
While I love the 58 version of Fly, and I liked a lot of things about it, there's just more to talk about when it comes to the 86 version, and a lot of that's due to the fact that it has way more production value and it's made later with a bigger budget and can just do more. So it seems a bit unfair, but that's just the way it is. I'd say the 86 one was better at it.
So it's 2-0 as well for you. For 86, that is. And I think that I will pretty much mimic you guys in that I'm really impressed with what the Fly 58 did, considering the time that it comes from. I think that if I'm taking Cody's analogy of taking things as a whole meal, the main course may have been better in the 58 one because the set design I thought was so much better. I thought the scientist's lab was so much more interesting than Brundle's like shitty apartment with 2 telepods in it. The lab was so much more interesting to look at and was very much a star of the show for me. The lab almost became a character in and of itself that I really enjoyed seeing more of. But when you take that out and then include that there are other things to think about here, such as the music and how important that is to the overall aesthetic, and just that it had that one scene that stood out to me enough that I made note about it. I think that like you said, Josh, the budget, the time that it came out, because more filming techniques and technology had come out by then, I think the 86 one just gets the nod from me as a total package as well, despite my love of that laboratory set from the 58 one. So it's going to be a 2-0 as we're halfway through the journey here for the 86 Fly as well. And I hope that you all are comfortable at this point. I think we're going to break for this week because we've already gone on for over an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm sure that we've got another decent chunk of time in us to talk about our other 2 categories and to continue to score this thing. And yeah, I want to give the audience an opportunity to kind of have some breathing room from one week to the next. So would it be all right with you guys if we kind of bust this one up into 2 parts and then sign off for now and then keep going?
No.
Cody's out.
We're doing this.
Cody's out. They are going to sit here for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And listen to the whole thing. So yeah, we're gonna break here, and then on next week's show we're going to cover the performances and the effects, which I think is going to be a lot of talking, and then get into some intangibles, and then kind of give a final recommendation between the two films. So for this week, Cody and Josh, I really appreciate you guys being on. Appreciate you all diving into these films with me and providing your insight, and look forward to speaking with you some more about these two films. And in the meantime, folks, please find us at Screen Sermon on Twitter. You can also find the Screen Sermon podcast on YouTube, on Facebook, and please send us your requests and feedback and comments and anything you like really to screensermonpod@gmail.com. I would love to read and have an opportunity to respond to you all, whether it be comments on YouTube or emails and things like that. Just reach out to us. We're ready to hear from you. So for this week, Code, Josh, very much appreciate you having the time to chat with me, and we'll talk again next week.